Larry, I want to brag a little bit about my 7-year-old first grader, little girl here in the house. I noticed lately she's been practicing her cursive letters. And
a first grader?
Yeah, well,
that's impressive.
I didn't think too much about it, because she is pretty advanced with what she's been through in kindergarten and all. I thought they got pretty far in kindergarten, but she would ask me how to do certain letters that she was having trouble with, and she would practice them over and over. And come to find out, it wasn't for school. It was because she wanted to learn it on her own, which I thought was impressive.
That's pretty good.
Because you hardly see people writing in cursive nowadays. I'm not sure where she would have picked that up. But, and by the way, folks listening, this is Anthony Goodrow and my cohort, Larry Smoke, and
Hi,
this
gang.
is Unclear Thinking Podcast, and thanks for joining us. But it got me to thinking about, you don't see a whole lot of cursive writing anymore from people, and that's certainly, to a certain degree, that's understandable, simply because the way we communicate has changed lately.
I'm guilty of it too.
Oh, absolutely. So I did a little poking around the internet, and I found this article, the one I sent you. Well, I found this at the artofmanliness.com. Now,
I see a lot of their stuff. People tend to share a lot of Art of Manliness stuff on social media, so I tend to see a lot of their stuff. It's usually pretty interesting.
Yeah, and this article is pretty interesting too. What did you glean from this article?
I learned a lot. The different methods of instruction over the last 2 centuries, I didn't know anything about. The Spencerian script, the Palmer script, all that was new to me. But on the whole, what kind of struck me was the way we've gotten away from handwriting, from the written form of communication. And I don't know so much I got it from the article, but it kind of drove home something I'd already had in my mind as to how much better our forebears were at conveying an idea than in general than we are. And I suppose it's because with the written word and no other form of communication, they were required to organize their thoughts better before conveying them, whereas we in our modern instant gratification society, and I take that all the way back to the telephone, so in the last 150 years when it was possible to have instantaneous communication, you've got more than one shot to get across a point. So we don't subconsciously worry so much about getting the point across right the first time because we know we've got several chances.
Right. And not only did you have one more shot, but it was so, like, take letter writing, for example. They tended to be lengthy as opposed to, what was that last text message I sent you today?
It was one letter.
The letter K.
It was the letter K.
Because I'm too lazy to even type OK.
And we're certainly not unique in that.
Now, naturally, I got that from my children, and it annoyed me at first, but now I've, absorbed it into my own lexicon.
I have no children, and I do it too. So,
so when you wrote a letter, you had several pages to get your point across, and when you write so many letters, just like anything else, you get good at it, and you get very good at thinking out what you want to say and saying it or writing it, and you have to develop a talent for it, but you do it naturally. You do it almost instinctively through repetition. But if you don't do it over and over, you're not going to get better at it, just like anything else.
And the sadness of it is that our society's children not only won't practice it over and over, they won't do it at all because they're not required to in school anymore. And I guess we're old enough. I mean, we're not even 50 years old yet, but we're old enough that I vividly remember learning handwriting, penmanship, in grade school. And in just that 30 years, it's not fewer and fewer, if any, school systems are doing training in handwriting. I'm even personally acquainted with someone who works in a school system, not locally, but it wouldn't surprise me if local ones do too, that not only does that school system not teach penmanship, they don't even require children to learn how to write at all, except for learning their signature. And that they don't even teach them until high school.
Well, I find that disheartening. There's so much to writing other than just communicating too. It's good for your brain. It's just writing things down is just part of the thought process that, for me, it improves, how I think.
Oh, the episode that we did several weeks back about organization, that was one of the methods of improving yourself that was suggested. We're keeping handwritten lists for that very reason, the process of handwriting your tasks and your to-dos locks them into your short-term memory. So hell, it's coming back up.
Well, I see it over and over. It consistently works for me. Writing something down seems to cement it in my brain a little more. But what's funny is, I don't know if you remember it this way, in school, learning how to write, almost without fail, divided down the line between the boys and the girls. The boys had crappy handwriting. The girls had good handwriting. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if they practiced more or paid more attention to it or what the case. That seemed to be the case. But now we write in a log book at work. We have to handwrite notes for communication, and it's more of like a CYA exercise than anything else to ensure that you've passed on the information to the next person coming on. But I was told recently that I write like a girl, and of course that comes from somebody.
That means somebody can read it, is what it means.
Yeah, it's legible, and I write in cursive now. But I think that's a function of somebody who's come from a school where handwriting has been de-emphasized. But that was a little, I have to admit, that was a little ego stroker for me, because now every time I write my notes I think about that, and I act like I'm Thomas Jefferson signing the Declaration of Independence, or John Hancock, or whoever. But my handwriting has evolved. I used to write in all caps when I would write, because at some point I read that was a sign of intelligence, and even if I wasn't intelligent, I was going to.
No, I didn't know that. I must be a freaking genius then, because I still do it. There's your evidence to disprove that point.
I did switch over at some point to just writing in print, and I try to get fancy. You know how a little A on your typewriter, or anytime you read something printed, the A is different than we learned in school. It looks like a little backwards 6. I wrote like that. I'll use that. I started putting little lines through my Z's.
Well, I do that too, but that's the computer nerd in me, though. I do the zeros with the slash through them, and the Z's and the 7s with the marks to differentiate them from numeric characters. That's just the computer nerd in me.
And let me give you the strongest case I can possibly give you, albeit anecdotal, but the strongest case for the value of handwriting. About 6 weeks ago, I stumbled onto a book. It's called The Artist's Way. The author's name escapes me at the moment. But the purpose of the book was for people who want to engage in any artistic activity. It gives them certain exercises and how to do it. And the number one exercise listed in it is something called morning pages. I don't know if you ever heard of that or not.
No, I don't think I have.
There's tons of info on the internet if you want to look around for it, if you're interested, or anybody out there is interested in hearing about this. But
we'll find the author of the book and put the name of the book and the author's name in the show notes.
But morning pages is an exercise in which the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, before you do anything else, is you start writing. And you write stream of consciousness for 20 minutes straight. Just kind
of like diary of the brain, just letting it all run.
Absolutely. Even if what you write down is, I can't think of anything to write.
Yeah, it's still flowing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nothing. It's not something. It's not a journal. You're not going to go back and read it. It's not for. You can throw them away if you want to. I happen to keep mine. I'm just kind of measuring my progress. But what it's supposed to do is free your mind up to pursue whatever you want to pursue artistically. Mine was actually writing, but it doesn't have to be writing. It can be anything artistic. I mean, writing music, I mean, playing music, it can anything of that, any pursuit of that nature. But what happened was, on day 3, I've been doing it for 47 days now.
Ooh.
On day 3, I got a story idea. and it was based off something I thought of 20 years ago, but I never could advance the story. It was the start of a story, but every once in a while over the past 20 years, this thing pops in my head every now and then, but I've never been able to advance the story. On day 3, it started coming to me. I have almost a 180-page notebook filled with story.
That's progress.
Yeah, I just it comes and goes. But all I can say is creatively, my mind has exploded. I keep thinking of these things, these plot lines, these character arcs. They just keep coming to me, and I don't know where they come from because I'm not used to it. It's really bizarre. I mean, I get up on days when I have to go into work at 7. I usually have to leave here at 6. I get up at 5 in the morning to do this.
That's too dedicated for me.
it's at first it was very difficult. Now the first thing I do is pop out of bed and grab my notebook. But what does that tell you about handwriting?
It's enlightening.
I don't know.
I should try that myself. When I do movie reviews, which sadly is not as often as I would like or should, now that you say it, I'm realizing I kind of do the same thing. I've always been the kind of writer that I also just, at a keyboard, of course, and a word processor, I just start blah, 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 blah. And because it's a word processor, everything is there. I can use whatever thoughts I throw out there, and then I can organize them however I see fit. I guess it's the same process as doing it on paper. I'm just not wasting paper. I know. I avoid doing it longhand because my job is basically data entry. I'm business manager, accounting, that sort of thing. So all facets of my job boil down to data entry. So I'm on a keyboard the majority of the day. I'm a sort of computer nerd. I'm on a computer a lot, on a keyboard a lot in my spare time. I enjoy writing. I do it with a keyboard. My hands are shot, and it hurts to hold a pen anymore. I don't have arthritis yet, thank God. It's just muscle fatigue. I just use my hands so much that my hands hurt when I try to write longhand. Plus, I don't hold a pen right. My mother, bless her saintly soul, taught me how to hold a pencil before she shipped me off to kindergarten. My mother is left-handed. I am not. And kindergarten could not fix me. So here we are 44 years later, I still hold a pen wrong. I'm right-handed, and I hold it all kink curled up like a left-hander, which doesn't help. Which does not help the muscles in my hand relax any. So handwriting is physically uncomfortable for me. But back to the original point, I see what you're saying, that yes, the process of just letting it all go, and after a while things starting to take shape in your mind, I can see how that works.
It's almost like some sort of scientific magic to me, because it's just such a bizarre new way of how my mind works now, that there has to be a science behind it. And I think that's what this article kind of points to a certain degree, in that it has value, and it's not just to carry on a tradition. It
does serve a purpose.
It does serve a purpose.
And a constructive purpose of that. Do you think, with absolutely no data whatsoever to support it, do you think that with the decreasing now to almost non-existent instruction of handwriting and penmanship in schools over the last 30 to 35 years, and the increase in cases of ADD, ADHD, attention deficit disorder, in our schools on the rise over the last 30 to 35 years, coincidence, correlation, relation?
After reading this article and you presenting it, I would be shocked if there wasn't.
I mean, and again, with no data whatsoever, it's strictly speculation. But here we've been discussing for 15 minutes how the process of writing something with your hand helps you compose your thoughts in a more coherent manner. And what is ADHD? The inability for children to think in a, metaphorically speaking, straight line. These children, quote unquote, don't test right. because they can't concentrate. Well, maybe if they were taught from day one to do something that made them concentrate, possibly it would help.
Well, you know what? I used to think that it was tied to possibly impurities in processed foods or chemicals in processed foods or something of that nature. But I'm almost convinced now that it has to do with not only this lack of handwriting, but the fact that, put on top of that, all the visual stimuli that children get today through video games and television. And it's not the direct correlation of video games equals bad. It's the combination.
Yeah, it's just another ingredient in the mix.
Right.
All of us, all of our input is so instantaneous anymore that
passive.
Yeah, passive and instantaneous that we're not used to having to. And I say we, I include all of us. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I'm in social media. I text. I like the tech lifestyle. I like to absorb content. We're also used to getting all this stuff instantaneously that we don't or can't or have difficulty forcing ourselves to slow down and formulate a thought, an idea, a notion, and then present it right the first time.
And not only that, the reactions people have to the stimuli aren't really the brightest reactions in the world either. Does anybody say anything besides OMG anymore, or can they pose any cogent thoughts or reaction to anything without a acronym of some sort?
Or an emoji.
Yes. Oh, is that not making it worse or what?
And again, I'm guilty of it too. I do it. I shall not be called a hypocrite because I do it too.
And how many times do you see in the comment section of some sort of social media somebody has replied with a meme poster of some sort? And that's another sign. The signs are just getting overwhelmed now. And the bad thing is this is starting at the point where this has become so pervasive in the age group of people that are graduating college now and going back to teach these children that we were referring to earlier.
Oh yes. Yeah, we've gone through now at least one, if not two or more generations of children with no handwriting instruction, and they're now adults and teaching kids, and they don't know how to write or form a thought coherently either.
And they don't have the historical perspective to see the difference between how it is now and how it was before.
And not to say that in a finger-pointing, ooh, rotten kid sort of way. It's just an observation. Right. I mean, it's a result of us as a society, our lack of attention to the importance of that subject. And
that's the sad part, is it can't possibly see the ramifications of it just from one generation to the next. There's, I don't blame anybody for not seeing it. It's they can't.
Have you ever seen the Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War, the famous series he did for PBS 20? Almost.
I have not seen that. I'm aware of it. I have not seen it.
I've seen it. I saw it on its initial run 25 years ago, and I've made the point of watching it a time or two in the years since. The first episode of that miniseries, at the very end of the episode, there's about a 5-minute segment where the actor Sam Waterston is reading a letter from a Union soldier to his wife, and the Union soldier wrote the letter on the eve of the first Battle of Bull Run. And of course, you can find this anywhere on YouTube. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you folks can hear it too, if you haven't already. That letter is so beautiful and so eloquent. And the soldier's name was Sullivan Ballou. He was not an itinerant sharecropper or anything, but neither was he a wealthy socialite. He was of that day and time, middle class. I think he was an officer. I should know that, but I don't off the top of my head. But regardless, he was not like super educated, but neither was he illiterate. And the sentiments and feelings he conveyed to his wife in that letter, buddy, if you listen, and I'm sure Sam Waterston's reading added a lot of emotional power to it, but the sentiment remains the same. If you can listen to the reading of that letter and not end up in tears, you have no soul. And that letter is such a fantastic example of how people from 150, 200 years ago were so much better at organizing a thought and conveying it effectively the first time, because that's the only way they knew how. They knew they had, well, knew subconsciously, they had one chance to get this point across. There was no back and forth communication across a distance. I mean, the only back and forth communication was face to face in person. And that letter is a sterling example of how beautiful a thought can be expressed on paper.
Well, I'm going to go look at that now. You've sold me on that.
We'll do it after the show. Let's finish the show first.
Wait, we're done here. Deal.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes along with that book we mentioned earlier. You folks out there, if you haven't heard that before, well, you should watch the whole series. It's a fascinating series. I'm a Ken Burns fan, but yeah, that 5 minutes alone is incredible.
Well, that reminds me of my reading my grandmother's letters to my mother years ago, and what sticks in my mind about them is not only was her writing, did it have like an artistic visual flair to it, the way she wrote the letters themselves, but they were written with such a style. The flow, it just flowed. She used just great syntax, and what my English teachers always recommended, varying sentence structure to give it a good flow to it. It's from another time, and she wasn't Melville or Hemingway. I'm not trying to say that, but she's just an average housewife. But she had the skill to write it.
Well, she had a skill that we have allowed to deteriorate,
and that's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
Well, maybe we can get some feedback from some of our listeners. Maybe if we can get some, albeit emails.
I mean, it would be electronic communication. Hypocrites that we are.
But yeah, I guess what they could do is they could write the letters, handwrite them, and scan them,
and then email us the PDFs. Yeah, that would work.
Solved.
You genius, you.
So, if anybody has any comments, show ideas,
always looking for those.
Email us at unclearthinking@gmail.com.
Yep.
You can find us on Twitter at Anthony Goodrow and at LA Smoke. How else can they contact us?
They can communicate with us by way of leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes and or Stitcher and or YouTube. And when you folks leave the review, of course you slap your 5 stars on there. That's because we're that good. We get 5 stars. And then in the body of the review, you can tell us whatever you feel like telling us.
And if you leave a 5-star review, we may just mention you on the show.
Unless we get like 6,000 of them, then we probably wouldn't have time to. But wouldn't it be nice to get 6,000 of them?
I'll take 6 right now.
Yeah.